History Things podcast, a conversational approach to discussing social, industrial, maritime, music, and military history. Join us and our special guests as we dive down the rabbit holes of your favorite stories from the past. Follow the History Things podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or online at Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be sure to leave a review and a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast app. Pat and Parker are coming right up. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoy the show.
For more than 70 years, the wreck of the Titanic lay in darkness, 2.5 miles beneath the surface of the North Atlantic. Beyond the reach of divers and hidden from the eyes of the world, the great ship rested in silence. Storms passed overhead. The world went mad and went to war twice. Generations were born. They lived their entire lives and they passed on while the broken hull of the most famous ocean liner in history remained exactly where she had fallen on that cold April morning in 1912. Many believed that she would never be found. But in September of 1985, that changed. After decades of searching, false leads, and the technological trial and error, an international team of explorers finally located the wreck of Titanic on the floor of the Atlantic. What they discovered was not a single intact ship, but a vast debris field, evidence of a violent end and the silent testament to the lives that were lost there. For the first time since the night of the disaster, humanity looked upon Titanic, and the world was captivated. Photographs from the seabed appeared on the front pages across the globe. Scientists, historians, and engineers began to study the wreck in ways never before possible. Each expedition brought new revelations about how the ship broke apart, how she settled on the ocean floor, and how time, pressure, and deep-sea organisms were slowly transforming the remains of the once great ocean liner. In this third part of the Titanic Revisited series, we will descend into the depths ourselves. We will explore the dramatic discovery of the wreck in the 1980s and the pioneering technology that made it possible. We will follow the expeditions that returned again and again to study the ship, mapping her remains and uncovering artifacts that tell deeply human stories of the passengers and crew who never came home. And we will examine what decades of research have revealed about the ship's final moments. Tonight we tell a story of discovery, of technology pushing into the unknown, of history waiting in the dark until someone finally turned on the lights. Welcome back to the History Things podcast. I'm Pat McGuire.
And I'm Parker Russell.
This is Titanic Revisited, Part 3.
Today, the Titanic occupies a unique place in history. It is remembered not only as a maritime disaster, but as a turning point in the relationship between technology and society. The sinking challenged assumptions about safety, progress, and human control over nature. It forced governments and industries to change. It inspired new laws, new designs, and new expectations. And it also left behind stories of bravery, loss, survival, stories that continue to resonate more than a century later. Every April, ceremonies are held to honor those who perished. Their names read aloud as bells toll. Flowers are cast into the sea, and ships sound their whistles in remembrance. These rituals serve as a reminder that behind the years, statistics, headlines, and research studies, the people who sailed on RMS Titanic were real people, families, friends, and dreams, interrupted by a single night of tragedy. Would you say they are different dreams?
You're a bastard.
Different dreams.
Oh, you
The legacy of Titanic is not confined to documentaries, museums, or memorials. It lives on in the safety procedures followed on modern ships. It lives in the warnings issued to vessels navigating icy waters. And it lives in the collective memory of a world forever changed by one catastrophic voyage. More than 100 years have passed since that April night, yet the story endures. And in that sense, Titanic is more than history. This is where we continue the story of RMS Titanic. By the 1980s, the RMS Titanic no longer lived at the bottom of the ocean. It lived on in collective memory. But it wasn't the sharp, immediate memory of those who had stood on her decks or drifted in her wake. It was a more distant and softer, a story passed down. A tragedy retold so many times that its edges had begun to smooth. In those years, however, there was no wreck to visit. No images beamed up to us from the seabed, and no rusting bow rising out of the dark. The Titanic existed somewhere beneath the Atlantic, but where? Where exactly, no one could say. The coordinates were uncertain. The condition was unknown. Some believed that she had sunk whole, resting upright in silent dignity. Others argue that she must have broken apart on the surface during her descent. Those were theories, arguments, books written with conviction, but no proof. And so, in the absence of reality, imagination filled the void. People pictured her as she had been, bright, grand, illuminated. They imagined the last hours not as chaos, but as something almost composed. The band playing, the passengers standing calmly, gentlemen stepping back, allowing others into the lifeboat. The story had become something more than an event. It had become some kind of moral theater about pride, about class, about how people behave when the unthinkable happens. Much of it was true, but not all of it. And certainly not in the way it was remembered.
In living rooms and classrooms, the name Titanic carried weight. Something known and almost comfortable in its familiarity. It was a tragedy at a distance. A symbol, a cautionary tale. You could speak about it without feeling the cold, without hearing the screams, and without imagining the silence that followed. A great many variables helped shape the popular memory of RMS Titanic, but it was perhaps film and motion picture that were the most influential of all. A Night to Remember, a 1958 film based on the book of the same title by Walter Lord, had been extremely popular, reaching an amazingly large audience, and it was praised for its realism and attention to detail. It introduced thousands of people to the tragedy, But for all of its accuracy and praise, in many ways it was a careful and respectful interpretation. It carried a tone of order, of dignity, and certainly quiet bravery. Over time, though, those elements grew larger in the public imagination. And while the confusion, the panic, and the raw human desperation, well, that slipped further into the background. By then, Titanic was no longer just a ship. It was a word that people used, a metaphor for failure, for arrogance, for something too big, too confident, brought down in a single, irreversible moment. It had moved beyond history and into the popular lexicon itself. But Titanic wasn't left entirely in the past. In the 1980s, there were still voices. People who had sailed and survived were still alive. Not many, but the voices that remained were insistent. Among them was Ava Hart, who had been a child when the Titanic sank. She was known for her vivid, though often contradictory recollections and outspoken advocacy for maritime safety. By the 1980s, she spoke with clarity and force, pushing back against the softened version of events. She remembered the fear, the suddenness, the screams in the dark.
And we rowed away, and I didn't close my eyes at all. I saw that ship sink. There wasn't any panic until the lifeboats left, and then there was panic galore. We were down on the ocean. We could hear them running about on the decks and screaming. You can imagine people came up from their cabin, went onto the deck, no lifeboat, tearing around the other side. That's when the panic was there. There wasn't any panic at the time I got in a lifeboat because there weren't enough people up there. And there were enough people there to just get into the lifeboat. But after that, when the others started coming up from their cabins and there were no boats, gosh, there was panic. We could hear it. And I saw that ship break in half. And the forepart went down nose first and the stern of that ship stood up in the water for quite a long time, or it seemed a long time to me, and then keeled over. And we heard the dreadful sound of people drowning, which was, unbelievable. My mother used to say sometimes, do you remember the silence that followed it? And that's quite right. It says the whole world stood still that night. Once the lights had gone, the ship had gone, the sound had gone. Oh, it was dreadful. Dreadful.
And yet beneath all of that, beneath the films, the books, the conversations, there was a question that never quite went away. Where is it? Where is the ship? The depths of the North Atlantic are vast, unforgiving, and dark beyond imagination. Somewhere within that immense wilderness, 2.5 miles beneath the surface, must lay the remains of the most famous ship in history. By the late 1970s and into the early 1980s, that question began to take on a new energy. Technology was changing. New sonar systems could map the ocean floor in remarkable detail. Remote-controlled cameras could descend into depths once considered unreachable, and powerful computers could process data faster than ever before. These innovations opened the door to a new kind of search. The deep ocean, once unreachable, was slowly becoming accessible. There were whispers of expeditions to locate the wreck site, and of the possibility that the Titanic might finally be found. At the center of this effort was a determined oceanographer named Robert Ballard. Ballard had spent years studying the deep ocean and developing robotic vessels capable of operating those extreme conditions. He believed that with the right equipment and the right strategy, the Titanic could finally be found. But the mission would not be as simple as researching technologies and looking for the ship, because in reality, the mission to find the Titanic wasn't really the mission at all. In the early 1980s, he was a driven deep-sea explorer with a bold idea to locate the long-lost wreck of the RMS Titanic. But the reality of oceanographic research was simple. Such an expedition required enormous funding, advanced technology, and access to naval resources that only the U.S. government could provide. So, Dr. Ballard went to the U.S. Navy. And what happened next unfolded against the tense backdrop of the Cold War, where even scientific exploration became entangled with national security.
When Ballard proposed his Titanic expedition, the Navy didn't immediately reject the idea. Instead, they reframed it. They had a mission of their own, one that had remained unresolved and deeply sensitive for years. If Ballard wanted their ships, their equipment, and their support, he would first have to help them solve a pair of underwater mysteries involving two lost nuclear submarines, the USS Thresher and the USS Scorpion. This wasn't just a scientific task. It was classified intelligence work. Ballard, a former intelligence officer himself, agreed. In the summer of 1985, Dr. Ballard joined forces with French oceanographer Jean-Louis Michel and a team of scientists from...
It's Ifremer.
Ifremer.
Yeah, that's the initials. It spells Ifremer.
All right, so I'm not going to butcher the French language, but it's basically the French Institute of Research and Exploration of the Sea. There's a whole bunch of French words I can basically figure out. Institute looks like that.
Literally
French
no
is
one
obvious.
knows
Research
French.
is obvious. Exploration is obvious. And Mare. I know that.
Mare Tranquillitatis,
So,
I guess.
Anyway, Ifremer.
Ifremer.
Together they launched a joint expedition into the North Atlantic. Their research vessel, the SS Nor, steamed slowly across the suspected search zone, towing the advanced sonar equipment beneath the waves. Day after day, the crew scanned the ocean floor, analyzing patterns and shapes that might indicate wreckage. At first, the results were discouraging. The sonar revealed only endless stretches of mud, sand, and rock. No debris, no metal, no sign of the great liner. Weeks passed, fatigue set in, supplies dwindled, and still the ocean remained silent. But Ballard refused to give up. The story of the Thresher was a tragedy that had already reshaped the U.S. Navy. In April of 1963, during deep diving tests off the coast of New England, the Thresher descended into the Atlantic as part of a trial following routine maintenance work. At some point during the dive, she lost power and things went catastrophically wrong. Without power, the Thresher could not blow the ballast tanks, allowing her to surface. It descended past her crush depth and under extreme deep water pressure, the hull imploded. All 129 crew members aboard were lost. The Navy had located the wreckage field years earlier, but what they lacked was detailed visual documentation, clear imagery that could confirm exactly how the submarine had failed and broken apart under pressure. Now, if the Thresher was a known tragedy, the Scorpion was something still of a mystery. In May of 1968, Scorpion was returning from deployment in the Mediterranean when it disappeared somewhere in the Atlantic near the Azores. There was no distress signal, no confirmed sequence of failure, and the speculation ranged widely. A malfunctioning torpedo detonating internally, a battery explosion, structural failure, and then even possibly, since this was the height of the Cold War, were the Soviets involved? The wreck of the Scorpion had been located through acoustic triangulation, but again, the Navy needed close-up, high-resolution images to better understand what had happened, and to quietly assess whether there were broader risks to the fleet and to national security. Dr. Ballard's expedition was equipped with cutting-edge deep-sea technology, including a towed camera system known as the Argo, which was capable of operating at depths where human divers could not go. As he descended into the abyss to navigate the Thresher and Scorpion in 1984 and 1985, respectively, he entered an environment few had ever witnessed. There was total darkness, near freezing temperatures, and absolutely crushing pressures at that depth. What he found was both scientifically invaluable and haunting. Instead of intact submarines resting neatly on the ocean floor, both wrecks told a more violent story. In the case of the Thresher, the evidence suggested that a failure in a pipe joint caused the seawater to spray into critical systems, which caused electrical systems to short out and the nuclear reactor to automatically shut down. With that, the submarine lost propulsion and sank. Ballard observed that the submarines had imploded under immense pressure and debris was scattered across wide areas of the seafloor. Larger sections lay closer to where the hull failed, where smaller fragments trailed away, carried further by the deep ocean currents. In essence, each wreck formed a long directional trail of destruction. And suddenly, for Dr. Robert Ballard, a light bulb went off. Rather than searching for a single object in the vast ocean, Dr. Ballard now understood that when it came to finding Titanic, The key would be to find the debris trail, not the ship itself.
But I had learned something from the Thresher and Scorpion that I couldn't tell anyone, because both submarines imploded before they came to the bottom. So on their way down, the pressure hulls went, and that implosive event is a gigantic explosion. And it just blew the submarines apart. But when I was mapping it, we realized that the heavy stuff went down like a bowling ball. Reactors, boom. But then the lighter stuff was a big, long line. And I went, didn't the Titanic do the same thing? So let's not look for the big pieces of Titanic, because they're only that big. Let's look for the debris, which meant I could space my searchlines much wider apart.
The debris fields of the Thresher and the Scorpion revealed how objects behave when they sink into extreme depths. They don't simply drop straight down intact. They break apart, scattering as they fall. And the deep ocean currents stretch the debris into large paths that can stretch for literally miles. This was not just a useful revelation, it was revolutionary. Because until then, most attempts to find Titanic had focused on locating the ship itself, an almost impossible task given the size of the search area. Ballard now had a new strategy. Instead of scanning endlessly for a hull, he searched for something smaller. Coal fragments, pieces of machinery, and other scattered debris. The expedition deployed a small robotic camera system known as Argo. Suspended by a long cable, the device descended slowly into the darkness, its lights illuminating a narrow path across the ocean floor. Hour after hour, the camera transmitted grainy, black and white images back up to the ship above. Mud, sand, occasional rocks, nothing more. The atmosphere inside the control room was dim, lit mostly by screens. People were tired, focused, and a bit numb from the monotony of watching the endless scene. Then, just after midnight, something appeared on the screen. At first, it was only a faint shape, a curved object half buried in sediment. The crew leaned closer to the monitors, straining to see. The object came into focus. It was a boiler.
What is that, Gizmo? I'd love to get that. Something big off to the right.
I know. It's starting to burn in. Oh, man, look at that. Look at that. Somebody should get Bob.
It was quiet as a mouse, but Emery woke up too. I don't know if you
It's okay.
Somebody ought to go get Bob.
Where is he?
Yes.
Call the bridge.
Yeah, call the bridge.
Down and get him. I know where he is. Okay.
Oh, I love it. I love it. Still plenty of jobs coming.
This is it.
Still plenty of
Look
jobs.
at
That
that
was
thing.
something that you could see.
It was a great big box with a hole in it.
That was a commode, baby. Look at that.
You realize
I know. Look at it. Whoa!
this is it too.
What? What is it?
I don't know, but
look
it's
it.
man-made.
It ain't no geology.
Let's see.
Good.
Okay.
04, 04,
Oh, well. Okay. Forward. Some more stuff coming.
I know.
Hope we don't find anything too big.
I don't know. It's awful heavy up in front of us, that's all I can tell you.
That is big.
Look at it. What the hell? Oh, God, it looks like a boiler. It looks like a boiler.
Yes. Yes.
Massive steel cylinder, unmistakably man-made. No natural formation could resemble it, and in that instant the room erupted with excitement. The discovery of a single boiler meant only one thing. They were getting extremely close. Moments later, more artifacts appeared in the camera's lights. Twisted metal, broken machinery, Fragments of the ship scattered across the seabed. The debris field stretched outward in all directions, silent evidence of the violent breakup that had occurred as the liner plunged beneath the waves in 1912. Following that trail, just as he had learned from the submarine wrecks, out of the blackness a towering shape emerged. Steel plates, rusted railings, and then the unmistakable curve of a ship's bow. From there, the mood shifted instantly from fatigue to electric intensity. On September 1st, 1985, at 12:48 a.m., the wreck of the RMS Titanic was found.
The wreck lay nearly 12,500 feet below the surface, in total darkness and under crushing pressure more than 300 times greater than it is at sea level. At that depth, water temperatures hover just above freezing, and currents can shift unpredictably in a moment across the seafloor. Immediately, the discovery challenged conventional wisdom. At the bottom, Titanic did not rest intact as many had imagined. Instead, the ship lay in two massive sections separated by a wide field of debris. The bow stood upright in the mud, its deck still recognizable despite decades of corrosion, and the stern lay further away, completely shattered and twisted by the forces of the sinking. The discovery stunned the world. News spread rapidly across television and radio broadcasts.
Good evening. There is no more famous shipwreck in the world, and the discovery of the Titanic in the Atlantic off the coast of Canada has been the dream of countless deep-sea explorers. Well, thanks to an American-French team, it is no longer a dream.
Scientists in a miniature submarine made the discovery early this morning.
Newspapers printed dramatic headlines announcing that the legendary ship had finally been located. Within days, images of the wreck circulated globally, capturing the imagination of millions. For survivors and families of the victims, the discovery carried deep emotional weight. After decades of uncertainty, they finally knew where their loved ones had come to rest.
As far as I'm concerned, it's my father's grave. And for that reason, I'd rather it was left.
And instantly, the site became more than a scientific or historical discovery. It became a memorial. More than 1,500 people died when the Titanic sank. And now the evidence of that night lies scattered across the seafloor right in front of them. Shoes, personal belongings, fragments of lives interrupted and shattered. Dr. Ballard later explained feeling as if, quote, "We realized we were not just looking up at a ship, we were looking at a graveyard."
We were jumping up and down, we were patting one another on the back, and then someone looked at the clock in the command center and said, "She sinks in 20 minutes. It was 2 a.m. She sank at 2:20. And that innocent comment just grounded us. And we realized, you have finally put the rest where these souls were lost. And everyone filed out. And it was a moment of silence because we were there. And that was pretty powerful.
Even in that moment, though, the team doesn't lose focus. They don't rush. They don't announce it. Instead, they keep documenting. Carefully, methodically, frame by frame. They know what this is, but they also know that it has to be proven, recorded, and understood. Dr. Ballard later emphasized that the discipline exercised when confirming they had indeed discovered the RMS Titanic, quote, "We had to be absolutely certain. This wasn't something that you rushed." The discovery of the century was unfolding slowly. Outside, nothing has changed. On deck, the ocean looks exactly the same. Dark, empty, unremarkable. No sign that miles below, one of the most famous ships in history has just been rediscovered. The Nore continues to drift, its instruments humming, and Dr. Ballard and his crew quietly reshaping history. The world won't know yet, but inside that dimly lit control room, something irreversible had happened. A mystery that lasted 73 years was now gone, and in its place an image that will never leave those who saw it first. a ship frozen in time. A silent monument in the deep. And as the team continues scanning, another realization settles in. The ship is not whole. They have found the bow, but not the stern. And the debris field stretches way beyond it, which means one thing. There were indeed two wrecks.
We're still searching for the stern. We can't find it. It does appear to be disconnected.
And this confirms what had only been a theory. That the Titanic didn't just split, it came apart violently, leaving sections far from each other on the seafloor. For decades, survivor accounts had conflicted. Some said the RMS Titanic broke apart, while others insisted that she sank intact. That night in 1985, the ocean floor settled the debate. It was the first major revelation, and it was only hours old.
Now, as Dr. Ballard and his crew feverishly worked on the confirmation of the RMS Titanic, the NORA's weather instrumentation began tracking a dangerous storm that was bearing down on their position in the North Atlantic. The ocean where the Titanic lies is notorious for some of the most ferocious and unpredictable weather in the world. And occasionally, icebergs, I hear. Storms in this region are so frequent and intense that the area has a fearsome reputation among mariners. Sailors routinely report extremely high winds and rough seas of 20 to 30 feet, while extreme events can produce waves reaching 50 to 60 feet high, making it impossible to launch or recover submersibles safely. Additionally, the clash of the warm Gulf Stream and the cold Labrador Current frequently creates a thick fog and haze, which drastically reduces visibility for ships trying to navigate the Iceberg Alley section. During the 1985 expedition, the weather became so rough that the Argo submersible, that multi-million-dollar piece of equipment, accidentally smashed into one of the Titanic's funnels while being towed as the NORA attempted to keep things stable on the surface during a sustained gale force wind, ranging from 35 to 45 knots, and that's roughly 40 to 50 miles an hour, and swells that grew to 15 or 20 feet or higher. On September 5th, 1985, due to rough seas and his Navy contract expiring, Dr. Robert Ballard and the RV NOR left the Titanic wreck site and returned to Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. For all its importance, the 1985 expedition has its limits. They cannot explore the ship, right? They cannot go inside. They cannot maneuver precisely. The Argo is towed, powerful but constrained. They were seeing Titanic, but only from a distance. Ballard knows immediately we had found it, but we hadn't truly visited it. To do that, they would need to come back. The ship is heading home. After weeks at sea, the RV NOR cuts through the calmer Atlantic waters, no longer searching, no longer wondering, because somewhere behind them in the cold darkness of the North Atlantic lies the wreck of the RMS Titanic. And on board, Robert Ballard and his team carry something far heavier than equipment. They carry certainty. For days after the discovery, the mood aboard the NOR is controlled, measured, deliberate. They know what they found, but the world doesn't, not yet. No social media storm waiting offshore. Just tapes, notes, images, evidence. Ballard insists on discipline, because once they say it out loud, there's no taking it back. Eventually, word begins to leak, however, not dramatically, but inevitably, through official channels, institutional briefings, and quiet confirmations. By the time the NOR approached the Massachusetts coast, the story was already starting to ripple outward. Something big had happened, something historic, and when the ship reaches the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, the ripple becomes a massive wave. The dock is not quiet, it's crowded. Reporters, cameras, microphones, technicians, curious onlookers. A media presence that feels almost out of place in the small, research-focused village of Woods Hole. And much like the rescue ship, the Carpathia, somewhat ironically, before the gangway was even fully set, the questions were already flying. Did you really find it? Is it intact? How far down is it? What condition is she in? Ballard stepped off the ship into a wall of attention. No Not chaos, but intensity. The kind that comes when the world suddenly realizes a 73-year-old mystery had just been solved.
It is with very great pleasure that I introduce Dr. Robert Ballard.
Good afternoon. What I've tried to do in the last few hours that we've had, we got the slides about 15 minutes ago. We were up until 4 o'clock this morning making these slides. I want to thank National Geographic for providing their assistance to me. It's been an extremely difficult period trying to do what we've done in just the last few days, and then to come and run into what I'm running into at a time where I'm still trying to process my data and understand what I did out there. So the summary that I'm going to give you today is really my best understanding of the data as I see it at this time. There's at least 35% of the data I haven't even seen. Our machines were running up until the last minute, so I'm sure that no scientist in the world ever wants to have to go through this sort of instant analysis of what he did when he hasn't even analyzed what he did. So some of the artwork that I've worked up, I hold myself fully responsible for what will later be wrong about it once I have a chance to look at the data, but I hope that I'm the one that's able to point out that I was wrong.
He walked them through it. Not a single wreck, but a debris field. 2 major sections, the bow and the stern. Evidence that the ship broke apart during her sinking. For many listening, this was a revelation. For decades, the public narrative had been uncertain and even romanticized. Now it's grounded in imagery directly broadcast from the ocean floor. The tone shifts, though. As questions continue, something is becoming clear. Ballard is not celebrating. He's careful, measured, and even at times solemn. When asked what it feels like, he doesn't talk about victory. He talks about loss. Quote, "We were very aware that we were visiting a gravesite. That landed differently. The room felt different. This wasn't treasure hunting. This was something else." It doesn't take long for the inevitable question. Will anything be brought up? Salvage, recovery, souvenirs? Dr. Ballard's answer was firm.
Do you have any plans to try raising the Titanic? Over.
Oh, I think that would be ridiculous. No, absolutely not. In fact, I would like to go and try to ensure that desecration of this memorial to 1,500 souls is left the way it is. Over.
Is there any possibility you might try to raise the cargo? Over.
No, I can't believe that it would be economically wise to do such a thing, and I don't want to do that personally at all, and I don't want to contribute to any such undertaking. Over.
As far as you're concerned, the Titanic should remain where she went down. Over.
Yes.
He explains the presence of personal items, the human traces scattered across the seabed, the shoes, the belongings, the evidence of life.
To me, this was the most powerful image. This was, to me, what set the tone for our expedition. Was when we, when you're down there and you're photographing the bow and you're photographing the stern and you're photographing the boilers and everything's gigantic. But then when you go across the debris field, you come across these pairs of shoes. And this is where people forget that after the Titanic crashed to the bottom, about a half an hour later, all the people that were in the water were freezing to death. It took about 30 minutes to die in that cold water, and those that didn't have life jackets then came raining down. Hundreds and hundreds of bodies came like rain and landed all across the debris field of the Titanic. The animals quickly found them, removed their flesh, and the deep sea is undersaturated in calcium carbonate, so it literally dissolved all the bones. It takes about 5 years, but the entire skeleton of a human at those depths will vanish. And what's left behind are their pairs of shoes, exactly as they were attached to the body. And this is why we were so adamant about, you don't go to Gettysburg with a shovel, you don't take belt buckles off the Arizona, you really should not take things from this site.
In that moment, he He's not just describing the wreck, he's defining how it should be treated. Now, for those of you listening out there, the co-host of our show, Parker Russell, actually lived through this moment in real time.
The sinking of the RMS Titanic?
In 1985. No, not the sinking.
Oh.
You are old, but not that old. Parker was a wee young lad of 5 or 6 years old at the time.
5, yeah.
That this was discovered. So let's toss it to you for a minute before we continue our story here. What was it like? You know, in a lot of ways, I feel like this is your moon landing.
It is. For me, this was. It's an very early memory, but it's one that set me on a path for like studying the Titanic for years. I can't remember the exact date because I was 5, but I know it was. I know for a fact it was early September, 1985. We were eating dinner at my grandfather's house. We frequently did that, and we were watching CBS Nightly News coming out of WABI TV, Bangor, Maine. We had a little black and white little TV over there back when that was still a thing. And Dan Rather was there, the voice of my childhood news. Was Dan Rather.
All right,
and he broke the story, and he talks about finding the wreck of the Titanic. There's a phone interview conducted. This is still actually this is before Robert Ballard gets back. This is one of those very, very few interviews that's granted. But I remember asking, because this is the first time I'd ever heard of the Titanic, and I remember asking my family, I was like, what is the Titanic?
Right.
And my grandfather, he kind of led the conversation about the Titanic, and he was focused on basically he described it as the cautionary tale of arrogance and pride.
Right.
Calling something unsinkable and then it immediately sinks. A warning about being overly boastful and overly confident.
Right.
And, of course, over the next several days, more stories would keep appearing, about it.
Yeah, I mean, the obsession switch was like
and for me,
September
immediately
1st.
for me, I loved, I remembered some, so the funny thing is, like, I watched that, I had not seen it since 1985, and I went back just a few hours before we recorded, and I went back and I watched that initial interview, and I was like, the funny thing is that, like, I had remembered those mid 1980s infographics, and they were putting, things in, and it was really, I just remember that. I also think it's interesting too, when I look back on that interview at this time, Ballard still had not found the stern, and the reporter referenced the 4 funnels. One of the 4 funnels still standing upright or something along those lines. And I think that's just because again, nobody had seen the wreck. Nobody had seen the images yet. They're still out at sea. Nothing had been really, like,
confirmed or
whatever.
Yeah.
And then from right after, and we're probably going to touch a little bit on that, but one other thing that really happened was, probably at that point, probably about 2 or so years later, because I had just kind of started researching Titanic a little bit on my own, as much as a 5 or 6 year old can research something,
What is that like? You're basically reading kids' books and watching.
I remember drawing pictures all over the place, and not that they were very good or anything, but
Sure.
But in my school library, a book shows up, and I take this book out all the time, and I'm reading it for lunch almost always. It was either that or a choose your own adventure book.
Sure.
And shout out to the 90s right there, 80s and 90s right there. The one thing I will say about it, though, is that in that book, and this kind of is important to what we're talking about today as far as the wreck site, those those famous Ken Marshall paintings that are in that book, and they're beautiful paintings, they have a way of making the wreck seem more hospitable, more habitable, right? Because it's like the soft blue light. Because that's
that protected,
careful
thing that we talked about, that even in black and white, that A Night to Remember does in the 50s. We have, and I will say, only really, and we'll get to this in the episode about film specifically, but it's really James Cameron that starts the conversation of the violence.
Yeah.
Because even in A Night to Remember, like you were saying, like, this is all carefully packaged. Ken Marshall's paintings are in this very
beautiful,
welcoming blue, right?
Yeah.
In fact, the painting, I think it's the painting that he does that features the Argo.
Yes, that's
maybe the Alvin, but
the tiny Alvin. There's this little tiny Alvin.
It's the Alvin, yeah.
And it's this little tiny Alvin. I wonder if maybe we'll drop a picture of it.
We will, but it gives me
but it's this little 2 scale, which Ken Marshall's. I'm not dissing.
It gives me
all.
like Jules Verne, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea
Absolutely.
kind of vibes, very magical.
And you immediately begin to think, wow, it's just like you're right. You can just go right down there and take a stroll. No, that you can't see more than
black.
You
it
can't
is
see
darker
this far
than
from your
you
face.
can imagine.
It's the void.
So we'll get to more modern studies and conversations, but for right now, let's dive back into the moment of discovery and initial exploration. The phones began to ring nonstop. Interview requests pile up. Television networks compete for access, and Dr. Ballard became overnight the face of one of the greatest discoveries of the 20th century. And amid the noise, Ballard returns to where the mission began. His labs, his offices, the quiet rooms at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. Reviewing the footage, analyzing the data, continuing the work. Because for him, the discovery wasn't the end. It was the beginning of understanding what had happened that night in 1912.
However, to truly begin understanding, they would need to return to the wreck of the site for continued documentation and exploration. The following year, in July of 1986 now, Dr. Robert Ballard returns to the wreck location and descends beneath the waves personally, this time aboard the research vessel, the RV Atlantis II. And it's what was waiting beneath the Atlantis II that made the return trip so uniquely important. The previous year, during the initial discovery expedition, Titanic was only able to be viewed remotely. The RV Noor had towed the Argo to the wreck site and broadcast images topside. In 1985, Ballard and his crew were only able to see Titanic from her exterior and through the grainy resolution of the camera feed on their monitor. Enter Alvin, the 3-person, human-occupied deep-sea research submersible owned by the U.S. Navy and operated by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Commissioned in 1964, it is the world's longest operating crewed science submersible, and it's often considered to be the gold standard for deep-sea research. For the first time, humans will descend to the wreck itself. Inside the deep submergence vehicle, Ballard and his team prepare to go down, slowly, deliberately, into the same darkness the Titanic vanished into decades earlier. On July 12, 1986, they released from the Atlantis II, and Alvin fell below. The descent took hours. The ocean light faded from blue to black, and the cabin temperature dropped. The pressure builds and begins to crush the hull. The water pressure at a depth of 12,500 feet is 5,500 to 6,000 pounds per square inch. That's roughly 380 to 400 times the atmospheric pressure that we experience here at sea level. Then faint shapes appear as the blackness turns a limited blue-gray again. The sea floor returns, and with it, the RMS Titanic. Ballard later described the first close approach as, it just loomed up out of the darkness.
And then there were a few more. I said, turn over towards those mud balls. What it was is the Titanic had hit with such force, it splewed, it just threw mud balls everywhere. And we were seeing the splatter. And I said, follow that splatter. And the mud balls got bigger and bigger and bigger. And finally out of my window on the starboard side, there's a wall of mud, like a giant bulldozer had just been down there bulldozing the bottom of the ocean. And I said, Ralph, it's right around the corner. And we came around the corner, and it was in my viewport, there was this wall of steel, like the slab in 2001, like the walls of Troy at night. It's just big, the end of the universe. And it just was there as a statement. And we came in, and I just looked out of my window, which I had to look up because the Titanic shot up 100 and some feet above me. I'm down at the very keel, and I just went, my God.
Seeing it up close is different. They're not watching a screen. They're there. The bow physically rose above them, massive, silent, and intact. Her steel plates are scarred but still recognizable. The railings stretch into the void. All of Titanic's windows stared back like empty eyes. And for the first time, the scale became real. It was like standing at the base of a skyscraper, Ballard said. Hours later, they found the stern, and it told a very different story. Where the bow was composed, the stern was chaos. Twisted metal, collapsed decks, structures torn apart and crumpled inward. It looks exploded, because in a sense, it was. As the stern fell, trapped air caused implosions, tearing the structure apart before it even reached the bottom. Ballard described it bluntly. The stern is a wreck.
Alongside Alvin is a small remotely operated vehicle, Jason Jr. Unlike anything used in 1985, Jason Jr. can actually go inside the wreck of RMS Titanic. It can access through broken windows and into corridors. Jason Jr. would be able to access rooms untouched since 1912. That means cabins, hallways, restaurants, and even the grand staircase. The spaces where time had stopped. Dr. Ballard later recalled, "We were looking into people's lives." In the years that followed, additional expeditions returned to the wreck. High-resolution cameras documented the ship in remarkable detail, revealing haunting scenes preserved by the cold, oxygen-poor waters of the deep Atlantic. Dinner plates lay scattered across the seabed. Shoes rested side by side in the sediment. Humble markers of the final resting places of Titanic's victims. Railings and staircases stood frozen in time, the pool still filled with water. Sorry, couldn't resist. Railings and staircases stood frozen in time. These images transformed public understanding of the disaster. They confirmed that the ship had broken apart before reaching the ocean floor. They revealed the immense scale of the debris field, and they provided tangible evidence of the final moments described by survivors decades earlier. Yet the discovery also raised difficult questions. Should artifacts be recovered from the wreck? Should the site be protected as a grave? Or should it just simply remain untouched, preserved in the darkness as a place of remembrance? As we said earlier, Dr. Ballard was clear. This was a graveyard, and as such, it should be afforded the same respect and be left alone at the bottom. However, these debates continue to this very day. The discovery of Titanic in 1985 closed one chapter of history and it opened another. It transformed legend into reality. It turned myth into evidence. And it reminded the world that even after decades of silence, the past can still speak from the depths. More than 70 years after the ship vanished beneath the waves, humanity had finally found her, waiting in the darkness, exactly where history said she would be.
In the years immediately after the 1985 and 1986 expeditions, the images of Titanic on the bottom lingered in the public mind, and the bow rising out of the darkness, the empty windows, the railings still intact after more than 70 years beneath the sea. For scientists, historians, and engineers, those first glimpses were only a beginning. There were still questions. Now, for the first time, there was a way to answer them. As expeditions continued through the late 1980s and into the 90s, investigators began to read the wreck almost like a document. Every fracture, every collapse, every scattered object, together they all told a story. Attention turned to the hull itself. Why had the ship failed so catastrophically after striking an iceberg? Was it a massive gash, as early reports suggested, or something else? Detailed analysis combining wreck imagery with recovered materials revealed a more complex truth. The iceberg had not sliced Titanic open in one long wound. Instead, it had created a series of smaller openings along the hull. Seams forced apart, rivets popped, plates buckled. Individually, each of these breaches might have been survivable. Together, however, they doomed the ship. The damage stretched across multiple watertight compartments, more than the ship had been designed to withstand. It was not one fatal blow. It was many. Engineers began to reconstruct the sinking itself. Using survivor testimony alongside the physical evidence, they built models, first theoretical, and then increasingly precise. And by the early 2000s, computer simulations showed what likely happened in those final minutes. The bow, flooding rapidly, dragged the ship downward. The stern rose higher and higher into the air, and stress built along that midsection. And then at a critical point, the structure failed. The ship broke apart. The bow descended relatively intact. The stern, freed and unstable, twisted as it fell, explaining the chaotic wreckage seen on the ocean floor. What had once been confusion, contradictory accounts, uncertain timelines began to resolve into a coherent sequence. There were smaller mysteries too. The band, had they really played until the end? The wreck could not answer that directly, but artifacts, testimony, and the discovery of items like the belongings of Wallace Hartley reinforced what many had believed, that the musicians had remained on the deck far longer than anyone might have expected. Not a myth, but reality. Even the ocean itself became part of the story. Scientists studying the wreck discovered that it was not simply decaying, it was being consumed. Bacteria, unknown before, were found feeding on the iron, forming delicate rust formations known as rusticles. Slowly, relentlessly, they were breaking the ship down. The Titanic was not frozen in time. It was disappearing. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the wreck had become something more than a historical site. It was a place of study, a memorial, and a warning. Public understanding changed again. Where once there had been a myth, there was now detail. Where once there had been uncertainty, there was structure. And people began to understand not just that the Titanic sank, but how. How the damage spread. How the ship broke. How the final plunge unfolded in darkness and cold. That story became more precise and in many ways, more unsettling. Because the closer the investigation came to the truth, the more human it became. Not just a grand disaster, but a sequence of moments, decisions, failures, physics unfolding in real time. And still the RMS Titanic remains far below the surface, quieter now than ever, slowly returning to the ocean that claimed it. The legend was never erased, but it was no longer all there was. Now beside it stands something else. Evidence, steel, silence, and about 5 more dead bodies.
We'll get there. That's a future episode.
Yeah, that's a future episode. Now beside it stands something else. Evidence, steel, silence, and a story no longer imagined but understood.
Of the multitude of things they learned between the 1985 and 1986 expeditions, perhaps the most important thing they learned was that Titanic had definitively split into 2 major sections. The bow remained relatively intact while the stern had been completely destroyed during the descent. A vast debris field marked the breakup, and the wreck was slowly being consumed by the ocean itself. And beyond science, a philosophy was now emerging. No artifacts will be taken, no objects will be disturbed. The Titanic was to be left as she was. Dr. Ballard's decision to leave artifacts alone at the wreck site defined how the site would be treated for years to come. The night in 1985 aboard the RV Nor was about finding the Titanic. But the return in 1986 aboard the RV Atlantis II was about understanding it. Together, though, they transformed the legend into a place, the mystery into a map, and a fading tragedy into something visible again, not just in history books, but in steel and in silence, and as a shadow physically on the ocean floor. Dr. Robert Ballard would later reflect, quote, "The real discovery wasn't just the ship. It was the story it told us once we got down there." And so from a silent stretch of the North Atlantic, nearly 2.5 miles beneath the surface, Titanic was found again. What began in 1985 as a search driven by curiosity and determination, and also technically a top-secret mission to find nuclear submarines, became something far more profound. The discovery of the wreck wasn't just a technical triumph. It was a moment that reshaped how we remember the disaster itself. For decades, Titanic had lived in black and white photographs, survivors' testimonies, and the edges of your imagination. But seeing her broken, scattered, yet unmistakably real on the ocean floor, it brought history into sharp, haunting focus. The first expedition to the wreck site gave us our earliest close-up glimpses of the Titanic as she rests today. The bow still proud, the stern a field of twisted steel, and between them a debris field that quietly tells a very human story. These images didn't just document a shipwreck, they forced a reckoning with the scale of the loss of life and with the passage of time itself. Together, these missions transformed Titanic from legend into a deep-sea memorial, one that continues to challenge us, to move us, and to raise difficult questions about exploration, preservation, and respect. But the story doesn't end at the ocean floor. In our next episode, we will surface into a different kind of legacy, one shaped not by sonar and submersibles, but by storytelling. From blockbuster films to global fascination, we'll explore how Titanic has endured in popular culture and why her story continues to captivate audiences more than a century later. And beyond that, we'll take a closer look at how the Titanic is studied today, and not just as a historical event, but as an evolving subject in science, archaeology, and ethics. We'll also examine a more recent and sobering chapter, the 2023 OceanGate Titan submersible disaster, and how it echoes the same themes of ambition, risk, and the limits of human ingenuity. For now, though, we leave the Titanic where she rests, silent, enduring, and still speaking volumes to those willing to listen. Thank you for listening to this episode of Titanic Revisited by the History Things podcast. I'm Pat McGuire.
And I'm Parker Russell.
And we'll catch you all later. Slán Awalia.